Kia ora, everyone. The numbers are climbing quickly as people join in. It will take a while for the people to join in through the webinar system, so I'm just going to leave it for a couple of minutes, and we'll start at roughly around 3 or 4 minutes past 11. So just sit tight, and we'll be with you shortly. And I'll repeat this statement in a couple of minutes once there's even more people in. If you're just joining us, we'll get underway in a couple of minutes once there's been plenty of chance for people to roll in. We understand that it'll take a little while for the webinar system to let everyone in. So we'll start around 3 or 4 minutes past 11, so just sit tight. We'll be with you shortly. Good to see people still rolling in. We're up to about 100 people. We have quite a few registered, so I'm going to leave it another minute or two just to let those additional people file in. And we'll start around 5 minutes past 11 at the latest, hopefully. So just sit tight. We'll be with you shortly. We'll just let those people roll in so they get to experience the webinar from the start. Okay, team, I'll give it another 30 seconds and then we'll get going. We're up to about 130 people in so far. We do have quite a few registered, so give it that last 30 seconds and then we'll get going. So thanks for joining us. I'll be with you shortly. Rightio, let's get going. Tēnā koutou, everybody. Welcome. My name is Dave Tilton. I am the chairperson of the TTM Industry Steering Group. So my role today is to give some background on what's led us to be here, and introduce the members of the Credentials Framework Group that are going to be talking through this subject in a bit more detail. So, Helen, if I can have the next slide, thanks. So, here's our contents. I'll be covering item 1, the background, and then I'll be handing over to Wayne Clark and Betty Mitrova, who you can see on the screen, and they'll dive into this Credentials Framework proposal. They'll introduce themselves when they take over. But further to Wayne and Betty, we've actually got a bunch of people in the background that are helping out answering questions. So we've got Helen, who you heard I mention her name a second ago. Helen is looking after sort of the coordination of the webinar behind the scenes from NZTA, and we thank her for her support. We've got a bunch of other Credentials Framework members in the background. So we've got Paul Tyson from Fulton Hogan, Sean Maxwell from Waimakariri District Council, Tom Kittle from Transport is in the background. We've also got a couple of other members from other organisations. Kim Lawrenson from NZTA is in the background. She's also a member of the Credentials Framework Group, as well as Melissa Fletcher from Connexus, and also Katriona Petrie from Waihanga Araro. What that kind of shows is there's a bunch of organisations involved in this process, and they're also in the background helping out, making sure we're all sharing in the same knowledge, and they can contribute their organisational perspective on things as well. So thanks, team. Thanks for your support. This is the first of 2 webinars, the second being at 3 p.m. on the 5th of March. So if you or anyone you know isn't able to see this through to completion, you're more than welcome to join us on the 5th of March, and we'll be doing this very similar webinar on that date. So both webinars are identical effectively. The purpose of both webinars is to introduce and explore the proposed TTM Credentials Framework. So if you're wondering what that's all about, you're in the right place, and that will all get explained today, starting with my part, which covers why we need a credentials framework and how we got here. Today's going to involve quite a lot of direct presentation, and we'll need almost the full hour to cover the content that we've got. There's unlikely to be any time for verbal questions and answers at the end. So how you can engage is through the Q&A function in Zoom. So post your questions, and those that are presenting or supporting in the background will get them answered. Our goal is to answer every or all written questions today and not leave anything unanswered. There will be a separate Q&A webinar on the 27th of March. So this planned Q&A webinar will mean that you've got time to consider what's presented today and the additional material that we're going to publish, and then come back with informed questions at the end of March. The consultation on this credentials framework starts today. So remember that this is the start of getting to know this proposed framework and not the end. So we really do encourage feedback and submissions, because this is an industry designed and led framework. There's no central agency here driving this model, so collectively we all own it. Today's about listening and absorbing, asking clarification questions, and gathering some detail. So over the next 6 weeks, you'll have the opportunity to contribute and continue asking questions and engaging. And the consultation will close on the 5th of April. By that time, we'll hope everyone has had plenty of opportunity to review and understand and contribute their thoughts to this framework and how it might deliver value for everyone working in TTM. So let's go. Next slide. Thanks, Helen. So just go, oh, you can stay there, it's fine. So the TTM ISG, the Temporary Traffic Management Industry Steering Group, which is the hat that I'm wearing today, was formed in 2023 in response to the intended shift away from compliance-driven traffic management and towards a more risk-based philosophy in how we perform TTM. So if you don't know exactly what that means right now, that's okay. There's plenty of other work going on to help people understand what moving to a risk-based approach to TTM might look like, and how it might be different, and what might change for people in different roles. That's the bigger picture. Today's picture is part of that, but it's not the whole. So the reason training and credentials is part of that is because the move away from more compliance-based TTM means that the COPTM will eventually be retired. So it's replaced partially by a wider document called the NZ Guide to TTM. The NZG TTM doesn't have the same level of detail and prescription that the COPTM has done. And one of the things that disappears is the training and competency model that we have, courtesy of NZTA, that gives everyone their STMS and their TTMO and their TTMP planner and warrants and qualifications. That's the topic that we're here to talk about today. So next one, sorry, stay there, Helen. The TTM ISG was established to help the industry with this transition, of which training and competency is just one part. So we aim to connect and represent the industry to navigate these changes, and we've made a lot of backroom progress so far. And this coming year, you'll see a lot more visible contribution to that purpose. So starting with this credentials framework piece, which falls under the banner of the Industry Steering Group as a whole. You'll also notice that the TTM ISG website is live, and all of the documentation and information about this credentials framework, as well as other topics as they get covered, will be housed on that website. So that's where you can go to find out more about this subject. We've also started a newsletter. So the first issue went out in December and the next one will be in March. So go to the ISG website, sign up for the mailing list and stay up to date with what's going on. You may have previously had news from NZTA, Waikotahi's TTM mailing list, maybe Auckland Transport, CCNZ, Christchurch City Council, I know, has a mailing list. All of those other information channels are alive and well. However, the TTM ISG is looking to centralize communication around the changes in the TTM industry. And those other distribution lists will likely share our content as well. So I do encourage everyone to visit the ISG website, sign up for the newsletter, and it will definitely help you going forward with being connected to the landscape of TTM. So next slide, please, Helen. The TTM ISG is a TTM industry-led group. So that was established with a relationship to the Roadwork Safety Governance Group. That's a collection of chief executives and senior leaders of some of New Zealand's biggest organizations in this space, along with Waikotahi and local councils and so on, to address the realm of roadwork safety. The TTM ISG is a mechanism to help the TTM industry safely evolve, making sure that the industry itself is at the center of that journey, not just a single entity or organization. To achieve our purpose, the TTM ISG has established 5 work streams, and you can see them listed on the slide there. One of those work streams is training and competency, and that working group is responsible for the work that you see today. That working group was actually formed even before the ISG was, and now falls within the ISG framework as part of the whole system of change. So next slide, thanks. Who we are, the TTM ISG's got 12 members, each representing a part of the sector. Not every part of the broad TTM sector can be represented, but there's been an effort to cover as much of the sector as possible. And where there isn't specific representation, there's hopefully a way to connect with that sector group through another representative pathway. We currently have 1 vacant position, the worker representative. So in the next few weeks, we'll be sending out an invitation for people to express their interest in that position. So sign up to the mailing list and stay tuned for how you might be able to contribute to that. So let's move on specifically to talk about training and competency. Since the COPTM was released in 2001, there's always been a system managed by NZTA that administers credentials for people working in TTM. So originally we had TCs and STMSs for different levels. And until 2009, that was primarily theory-based, there was a practical assessment at the highest STMS level. But in 2009, then NZTA revamped that model and aligned it partially with some NZQA unit standards and introduced a lot more practical assessment components. So that wasn't just all theory learning for practical application. Now, with the COPTM being retired eventually, that means that centralized training model will also be retired. So NZTA will no longer be a central organization arranging and controlling qualifications for training in TTM. So going forward, the industry will still benefit from gathering together and pooling our efforts towards a system that we can all use for training and credentials. It's to help with consistency and good standards and less duplication of multiple systems across lots of companies. The responsibility for training, instruction, and supervision has always sat with the employer. No central entity or organization can remove that responsibility. And the TTM industry has historically treated the warrant system as evidence that people are trained and competent in everything that they do. The reality is that this shift, with the retirement of the NZTA training and competency model, comes with clients and centralized entities needing to provide training of the needs of training going forward. So that means employers, PCBUs, are actually responsible for providing that training. And this system seeks to reorientate towards exactly how the law is written, which is where that obligation comes from. So the industry really needs to pick up the ball and run with it. The days of a mandated centralized system where you all get told what training you have to have and get a universal license to operate will eventually be no longer. Organizations in TTM will have to pick up the ball and run with it, as I said. And if you had to ask the question, what do I have to do now? Then you won't get an answer to that question. This webinar is about sharing how a group of industry representatives and large organizations have come together to develop a system that removes the duplication of effort from all those organizations having to create things on their own, and still have a framework that we can all use and get value from, and where the warrant system disappears. So this is about providing a framework for credentials and training, not replacing the warrant system. There's no central organization here telling anyone what to do. Organizations are required to train, instruct, and supervise their staff. No other organization can take that responsibility away from employers. So this model is about providing us all with a way to do that together. So what we're presenting, or what Wayne and Betty are going to start presenting any second, is a credible step one, move towards a system without the warrant system. So we know there's a really long journey ahead. This is just the start. This particular framework has been comprised by around 15 volunteers. There's been about 2,200 hours to develop this on your behalf. All of that has been free time delivered and contributed by those individuals. We're about an 80-20 rule at this point. So if what you see today doesn't quite land for you, that's okay. That's why the consultation process is all about. So we think we've done a good job, or the group thinks they've done a good job, and they've taken it as far as they can by themselves. And now it's about bringing in other perspectives and contributions to make it better. So before I hand over, I do want to say an incredible thank you to the work that has been done by this group of people. As I said, they are all volunteers, and they've poured an immense amount of hours into this. And you have to also respect the fact that they're doing it on behalf of not their organizations, but the industry as a whole. So to Betty and Wayne, thank you for the work you've done, and to those in the background the same. And I hand it over. Let's hear it.
Next slide, please, Helen. Just one more. That was a slide for Dave. Okay, just before we crack on, we're 18 minutes in, and there's a very large possibility that we are going to go beyond the planned 1 hour. We don't want to rush this. This is important information, and it's critical that you all have the opportunity to absorb it. So for those of you that have to leave at 1 hour, thank you. And for those that would like to stay, please do so. We're just going to carry on at the pace that we'd initially planned. So starting off here, I just want to talk about a little bit of background. So there was a call by CCNZ in October 2023 to establish a TTM Credential Framework governance group after Waka Kotahi signalled the warrant system through the release of the NZG TTM, as Dave mentioned. The purpose of the TTM Credential Framework governance group was to establish a mechanism to push the industry toward a replacement or a supplementary framework for something that we've known for such a long time, and additionally to support the industry through its transition. Since then, we've had a slight name change. As you can see, we are now the TTM Credential Framework Working Group, as this better aligns with the 4 other working groups that have been formed under the ISG banner. One thing that's consistently remained across the working group and it is its composition and the levels of energy and effort across all of the individuals. The group provides diverse sector representation and is made up of 16 contributors as a whole, 13 voting and 3 non-voting. So firstly, to introduce myself again, as the first of the 13 voting members, I'm Betty Mitrova. I work for Down in New Zealand, that's one hat, and I represent the Tier 1 representatives. And additionally, I'm the chairperson of the TTM Credential Framework Working Group. Alongside me are 2 other Tier 1 representatives, Chris Kerr from HEB and Paul Tyson from Fulton Hogan. As we move across the screen, we have our 2 RCA representatives. Tom Kittle for the North Island, and Sean Maxwell for the South Island. Furthermore, Bruce Goodall from the Road Marking Federation, Corin Wharado for the utility sector, Kim Lawrenson for New Zealand Transport Agency Waka Kotahi, Lena Tyrell from Down in New Zealand as the worker representative, Melanie Murison for ACE New Zealand, Tony Stella for TTM Trainers and Assessors, Wayne Clark from Chevron Traffic and ChevTrain for North Island TTM Suppliers, and Joe Allen from South Roads for the South Island TTM Suppliers. Lastly, the 3 non-voting members, Sue Hawkins from Waihanga Araro, Sue Roberts for Connexus Te Pukenga, and Dave Tilton as our appointed secretary. Next slide, please, Helen. Before we dive into the framework itself, it's important to understand the roadmap toward a credential framework and the process that sits behind it. There are 3 core elements within the roadmap, the first being design. This is to the left in the presentation. This is a reference to designing of the framework itself. This process has been backed by a research project funded by Concove and delivered by Becca on our behalf to look at not only what we currently have in New Zealand, but international best practice at To develop refers to the development of skill standards, credentials, and qualifications. This process has been supported by Waihanga Araro. Additionally, to develop also refers to the development of learning and assessment programs and materials. To date, this process has been supported by Connexus Te Pukenga, but will no doubt grow to include other providers. The development process of skill standards, credentials, and qualifications also has a layer of industry consultation, which is managed by Waihanga Araro. Upon completion of development through their technical advisory group, Waihanga Araro will consult the industry prior to submitting the final product to NZQA. We have seen this successfully drive the completion of the micro-credentials risk in TTM and TTM design. The delivery element then refers to the mechanisms of delivery, i.e. training materials or processes. The providers, for example, Connexus Te Pukenga being one, will be the developers of materials which the industry will have access to so learners can be supported in their journey. A few summary notes here. The TTM Credential Framework will never replace the role of the PCBU and their duty of care to ensure their people are trained and competent, but will instead contribute to it. The proposed framework has been developed by industry for industry to support PCBUs and provide credentials that are stackable to other TTM qualifications on the New Zealand Qualifications and Credentials Framework. The framework will align to TTM industry with other industries that already have developed vocational frameworks, and this will replace the current Waka Kotahi warrant system progressively as different framework components become available. Next slide, please, Helen. And now I'll hand you over to Wayne Clark to talk us through the foundational principles of the TTM Credentials Framework.
Thank you, Betty. Morning, everybody. Wayne Clark here from Chevron Traffic. One of the principles, sorry, Helen, back to the layered responsibility slide. One of the principles we took into account and have modeled the framework around is the layered responsibility model. In the past, we've managed risks in TTM by focusing on factors like how busy a road is or how fast or the speed limits on a certain road. As our understanding of risk has evolved and our training has improved across the country, we now recognize the need to shift our focus quite a bit more. We look at the management of risk, not just the risk factors. So this means being ready to assess risk as it changes in different situations and different environments, and how risk is an influencer in promoting safety throughout the delivery chain from planning, implementation, and assurance. This approach is called the layered risk responsibility model and is backed by research. I guess a way to think about it is, as somebody might enter the industry, like an onion, you become more and more aware of the environments and of the risk factors that might impact a work site or a worker. As you learn more and more, you become a lot more aware. So it's the foundation of the new training approach and will help us better manage safety and risk in the TTM activities we do on a day-to-day basis. Next slide, please, Helen. Another important principle, if you could just click the next button, Helen, as well, is understanding the PCBU's responsibilities or duty of care. So under HASWA, a business or undertaking must look after the health and safety of its workers and any workers it influences or directs. Current competency not just passing a warrant once, but rather supporting ongoing competency on an ongoing basis is a really important difference to note and really think about as we go through the rest of the model. PCBUs have always had a responsibility to meet their duty of care. The proposed framework represents a solid foundation to develop skills for people working in TTM. The framework we've developed covers all the common skills and tasks. However, it does not cover everything. And no training organization or institution should be dictating what skills a PCBU needs to have covered. That's up to the PCBU. It's their responsibility to ensure their staff are trained according to how they're going to be deployed and the environments they're going to be working in. This is something that's highlighted in the New Zealand Guide, and a PCBU can't completely lean on any framework. They need to think through how they are operating as an organization. So PCBU is ensuring all staff have the required competencies on an ongoing basis to carry out their tasks safely. A little important note at this point is RCAs are not part of the contracting chain. They don't have responsibility in this chain. Next slide, please, Helen. I'm gonna hand back to Betty now, who's going to take you through the framework overview, and then we'll dive into some of the layers in a bit more depth. And one more slide, thanks, Helen.
Thank you, Wayne. So the TTM Credentials Framework shifts focus from job titles to skills and capabilities necessary for effective TTM work. There are proposed to be 4 main entry points that relate to different industry work competencies. The framework clusters and standardizes core competencies common across the TTM industry, which will then allow skills standards to be grouped together into programs that lead to the award of New Zealand qualifications such as micro-credentials and certificates. So some of you might be wondering, what are credentials? Well, there are 3: skills standards, micro-credentials, and a New Zealand certificate. A skills standard replaces what we have known as unit standards. They are primarily standalone specifications of skills at a particular level, i.e. level 3 or level 4, and this level is associated to the level of performance the learning outcome sits at. Skill standards are used to assess competence. A micro-credential is also a pretty new term. It's essentially a mini qualification, as they are smaller than traditional qualifications. They focus on skill development in certain areas and may be stacked with a few skill standards to better meet specified needs in the workplace or community. A micro-credential is also designed to recognize learners' skills, knowledge, and experience. A New Zealand certificate, on the other hand, is a formal qualification. We have seen New Zealand certificates commonly used across other industries. A New Zealand certificate recognises a broader base of skills and knowledge, and it is usually obtained over an extended period of time through study or through work experience to showcase a more comprehensive understanding of a particular field. For more detailed information on credentials, visit the NZQA website. You'll see it in the link below, just under all of the descriptors for skill standards, micro-credentials, and New Zealand certificates, and it'll be available as a part of the post-presentation pack. Next slide, please, Helen. Now to talk through recognition of current competency, or RCC. This was previously known as recognition of prior learning, or RPL. It refers to the transferability of skills and knowledge, and in this case, the ability to demonstrate current competence from one framework to another. One thing that is common for all learners is the skills, knowledge, and experience from undertaking unit standards and/or warrants. Providers will use the information from unit standards and/or existing warrants to identify which part of a credential a learner might not have to do. At the time of enrollment, the provider will work with the learner to identify other skills, knowledge, and experience they might have that would support the completion of the credential. For Connexus, as an example, this process is called Advanced Portfolio Assessment, or APA. It involves the gathering of further existing evidence over and above the unit standard and/or warrants. A learner might have a professional conversation or potentially further learning and assessment to fill any gaps. One thing to note is though RCC is available, it is not an absolute given, and it is not a blanket rule. Its relevance sits at the individual level, and all individuals will have varied capability. A key factor here will also be that the evidence of current competence, meaning that what my capability and competence is now is what is critical, not so much what capability or qualification I might have had 2, 5, or 10 years prior. Next slide, please, Helen. So as we progress through the presentation, we will talk to the different elements of the TTM Credential Framework in more detail. For now, what I want to go through is the framework overview and structure. To the left, you'll see some numbers. These numbers are level 3, 4, and 5. These are the proposed levels under the New Zealand Qualification and Credential Framework. They are proposed as the level is not final until the development process of the skill standards, micro-credentials, or New Zealand certificates have been completed. You will then see that the framework is split into 2 sections, TTM delivery on the left and TTM specifications to the right. TTM delivery is primarily field-based specifications, whilst TTM specifications are more technically focused. The framework has 4 entry points, 3 within TTM delivery, 1 within TTM specializations. Can you please click, Helen? The red boxes, back please. The red boxes around low risk, low impact, mobile work and TTM work, risk assessment in TTM and TTM design indicate work in progress or work complete. Risk in TTM and TTM design have already progressed in the design and development stage and are now in the delivery phase. Consultation on these was done last year through Waihanga Arito. Low risk, low impact, mobile work and TTM work, on the other hand, have just wrapped up in the design phase and are about to go through a separate industry consultation component through Waihanga Arito before it can progress into the development stage. I'll now hand over to Wayne, who'll talk you through the TTM delivery in a bit more detail.
Great, thanks, Betty. Next slide, please, Helen. Bit of an overview on now going into a bit more depth on how the framework actually pulls together. So 3 main entry points you can see across the top in the dark blue boxes. The approach is very much the layered learning, or like we've talked about, even replicating that layered responsibility model. So as somebody enters the industry, you start learning in layers and moving away from our past where we might have all just attended a course in a classroom and you've got your certification and you're out on the road practicing. This way, we want people to learn in layers and steps that can stack on top of each other as your competence builds. So for instance, you'll learn about mobile work, you'll then start practicing mobile work and you'll get verified to be competent as a mobile worker. And I guess that just builds in competence, and as your skills develop or as you progress in your career, you can keep stacking either micro-credentials or skill standards on top of each other as you go. So the light blue boxes you can see in the model there are all the skill standards within a proposed certificate. The framework really supports a far more industry sectors in terms of allowing them to handpick skill standards necessary to support their operations and ensure that PCBU staff are trained appropriately for what they're doing or delivering. The concept of having to fully qualify an STMS to carry out some very minor functions on a network is a thing of the past. This supports the layered approach to learning. As a learner obtains skills, they can then carry out activities accordingly and according to what their PCBU requires them to do. Next slide, please, Helen. So we'll jump into one of the entry points being low risk, low impact work. This is an entry point skill standard aimed at individuals who carry out low risk, low impact activities on the road or the corridor. It's intended for workers whose primary function is not temporary traffic management, but they implement appropriate TTM controls to manage associated risks. So delivery examples of that would be inspection activities, surveying activities, or activities on the berm. Next slide, please, Helen. Another entry point is mobile work. This is an entry point skill standard for individuals or teams performing within a mobile operation. It's designed for those who contribute to the team's performance in the mobile TTM work, but does not cover the supervision of the operation. Examples of this would be pilot, shadow drivers, TMA driver, AWVMS driver, grader, sweeper driver, cyclic maintenance driver. Next slide, please, Helen. The third entry point is TTM work. So this is a skills standard intended for individuals assisting with installing, maintaining, operating, or removing TTM. It's designed for those who contribute to the team's performance, but does not cover supervision of the operation. So delivery examples of that would be TMC, so manual traffic controller, laborer engaged in TTM activities, supporting the team installing a static operation. Next slide, please, Helen. TTM supervision. So this is a big block. It's a series of skills standards and micro-credentials for individuals who lead TTM operations. They manage the risk, they supervise the deployment of personnel and equipment, they deliver safe work sites. These individuals have the knowledge and skills to manage the risk and the risks in dynamic work sites as well. They supervise the TM workers and the mobile workers to ensure the safe implementation and maintenance and uplift of TTM sites. So examples in that space is obviously the STMS current qualification. Next slide, please, Helen. So I'm just going to focus in here within supervision. We keep talking about this layered approach to acquiring all these skill standards. Here's two examples of how that would work within supervision or that STMS style operator. So you'll see one arrow on the mobile supervision and the other one's TTM monitoring. So let's have a look in a little bit more depth as to what that might be. Next slide, please, Helen. Mobile supervision. So a skill standard for those who now lead mobile operations. They manage the risk, they supervise the deployment of the personnel and the equipment to safely deliver or manage a mobile worksite. So delivery examples of that would be obviously the leader of the mobile operation, cyclic maintenance driver, grader driver, sweeper driver, and A-type road marking. So again, this is the supervisor of the before mentioned mobile worker. Next slide, please, Helen. TTM monitoring. So a skill standard for individuals who maintain a pre-established site. It includes elements of risk, verification and monitoring, and quality assurance. Delivery examples would be, depending on the risk environment, this will be appropriate in some situations, but definitely not all. Might be appropriate for shoulder closures, truck access to building sites, low risk lane closures, be some appropriate uses. Next slide, please, Helen. In another block, what we're calling advanced TTM supervision, it's a skills standard that equips individuals with the ability to assess and manage risks in much more complex environment. So just looping back to that layered risk responsibility model, as you climb the chain, this is the people that would be managing dynamic environments and situations. And so things are changing and they're equipped to better handle what to do about all those changes and the risks that apply to the site and the people on the site. So it could be appropriate for senior STMSs that have been in the industry a long time and have got a good appreciation of all the risks present on a site. Operations managers who oversee large amounts of crews simultaneously on closures across a city or a region or a project. So again, just a reference to the dynamic situation and risk assessment thinking. Things are changing and you've got to be on top of how that risk is shifting constantly. And again, another flag to that layered risk responsibility model. This is also aimed at people who are influencing safety and culture across an organization or a PCBU. How are they thinking about teaching everyone about the risks that they're exposed to and ensuring competence is being practiced on site? People are on top of managing these risks and keeping people safe. I'm going to hand over to Betty now, who's going to take you through the TTM specializations.
Thanks, Wayne. So now to look at TTM specializations in more detail. We are proposing that TTM specializations sit at a level 4. Each individual block is proposed to be a micro-credential, and when stacked, we are proposing the formation of a certificate in either TTM design with the option to expand into a proposed level 5 NZ certificate in advanced TTM design, or a level 4 certificate in TTM corridor management, or a level 4 certificate in TTM assurance. Helen, if you can click the animation, please. Oh, go back. Okay, something's broken there, but that's all right. So for some more detail, let's talk about TTM knowledge as a start. This focuses on the understanding, back please, yeah. This focuses on the understanding of how different TTM controls work to manage people that may interact with our activities and events. Its primary intent is to ensure that we understand the fundamental TTM controls and how they may be applied to manage risk. Risk in TTM. Risk in TTM was developed as a part of the Downer Enforceable Undertaking, and it was developed to fill a gap around the wider transition, but also the critical aspect of managing risk in TTM. It is intended to help us evaluate the hazards, potential exposure, and reasonable consequences relating to our activities and events. Understanding risk during each step of our tasks and what might go wrong guides us in determining reasonably practicable controls to eliminate and minimize these risks. TTM design, essentially gathering the information and other outputs required and designing an effective plan to manage traffic and other road users. TTM design helps to prepare planners to consult, coordinate, and cooperate with other PCBUs. It helps TTM designers to understand the quality assurance processes that may be necessary to support PCBUs to meet their obligations. TTM corridor management. Corridor management is generally focused on coordinating activities within a road corridor. It requires a deep understanding of regulatory requirements. However, it also involves effective consultation, coordination, and cooperation with other stakeholders accessing the network. TTM assurance supports people who undertake quality assurance and control of TTM practices to ensure that they align with legal, industry, and/or company requirements. It supports people who review and monitor the TTM system and identify potential risk areas and ensure they are mitigated through appropriate action. Advanced TTM design supports people developing complex and comprehensive traffic management plans that deal with complex situations of high risk levels. It supports people with a high level of TTM expertise who are able to plan for the practical realities of managing road users and road workers in a variety of challenging environments. Advanced TTM design supports the creation of robust and innovative plans. Next slide, please. So, transitioning from the Wakakotahi TNC model to the TTM Credentials Framework. The ISG Credential Framework Working Group and Wakakotahi want people to be able to transition as smoothly as possible from the current training and competency model to the new credential framework. While it will be up to each PCBU to determine what qualifications and training their staff have, we understand many will want to see how these skills they have already mapped over to the new framework as each credential becomes available. Te Pukenga, along with the technical advisory group members, will review new credentials to determine what evidence is needed for the recognition of current competence process. This may include evidence of your Wakakotahi warrant as well as working logs and other company records. This is why having evidence to support current competence will be absolutely essential in the process of RCC. Transitions will happen incrementally as each skill currently covered through the warrant system has a replacement in the credential framework. However, Wakakotahi will retain their TTM training database for as long as this is deemed necessary by the industry, so your record of learning in the current warrant system won't be lost even when the warrants are no longer being offered. Next slide, please. So, what do we need from you? We need your feedback on this consultation process, and we have two clear objectives to meet. Firstly, does the framework meet the needs of our industry? And two, what could future development of this framework consider? These are the overarching objectives that we want you to consider when providing your feedback. Next one, please. So in regards to finalising things and wrapping up the webinar, the consultation will end on the 5th of April 2024. So we urge you to please submit written feedback through the TTM ISG website. There will be a live Q&A webinar which will be held on March 27th, What we'll do is we'll go through all of the questions and we'll identify some key themes, and we will pre-prepare some questions whilst allowing everybody to ask live questions at the same time. We urge you to sign up to the TTM ISG newsletter and keep an eye out for any additional communication during this website. And with that being said, I'll hand it back over to Dave.
There we are. Got it. Thanks, Betty. And in fact, we finished well on time, which is fantastic. So I might just call on Wayne and Betty informally to just dive in and come back to anything you felt like you wanted to retouch on, or is there anything you wanted to expand on or recover? Just, this is our first run through of this, and appreciate that there's a lot of content there for everyone to ingest. So Wayne and Betty, we'll start with Wayne. Is there anything there that you want to touch on and just share with everyone?
I think as everyone, there's a lot to just work your way through and think through and let it dissipate a little bit. The supervisor block is obviously massive and will be the most intensive block of learning. We focused on 2 skill standards within their block. There's multiple within there, all the TTM knowledge learning that we're also used to, which signs and which ones you're supposed to use and how they all work and what are their, how they should be built, or which ones are compliant. There's a lot of understanding that goes into all the different blocks. I guess we've just tried to layer this as a bit of a build-up. So it's not one big course that you sit in and then suddenly you've got it all, because it's not typically how we all learn, and it's not typically how we've ever learned in the past. But what we have seen, and the constant examples, are people learn through a little bit of knowledge and then a little bit of practice, and that together starts building, we feel, competency. And that's kind of a fun, slightly less intimidating way to approach your learning and your career, because then as you've learned those base layers, a lot more aware about dangerous stuff that could kill you, and which side of the truck to get out and start setting up. And once you've got that under your belt, you can get the next block of learning, and so on and so forth. So the idea is you just get more and more skilled, but simultaneously more and more aware of the risks at all the levels as you start climbing. So you've been a worker, then you become a supervisor, but you're aware of the risks as a worker already. So then when you start supervising people working on those risks, that onion's there's a few more layers that have unfolded, and you're highly aware of what might happen to your crews. We feel, in creating this model, that hopefully it heightens the safety awareness of everybody working on our work sites. So we think it's a really supportive way to just advance yourself through the new framework and in your career.
Thanks, Wayne. Okay, Betty, I think something you might be able to cover is just what's going to be available from here. So what are people going to be able to have access to? What's the material information they'll be able to grab, and can they have the slides and whatever?
Yep, no, absolutely. So firstly, as Dave mentioned at the very start, this is just the beginning. It is not the end of the process. So really importantly, like I mentioned, hop on the website, sign up to the newsletter, provide some written feedback. What you will receive at the end of this webinar will be a presentation back. It will not be identical to the one you've seen. It will be more comprehensive, and it will dive into a further level of detail to help you digest things. For those of you who don't operate in a more kind of written fashion, what we will also have live on the ISG website will be a video. It's a 15-minute video that summarizes the whole entirety of the presentation in visual form for you to watch back and additionally look at in a little bit more detail.
Nice, thank you. It's got a couple of other sort of prominent questions that have come through on the Q&A, and we might have an opportunity just to answer those. And one is around TTM, subcontracting PCBUs, and how that relationship between a PCBU and a subcontractor might work. And I know that Paul Tyson's in the background and has been answering that verbally, in writing, but maybe Paul might want to jump in and just cover that as someone from Fulton Hogan who uses, no doubt, subcontractors around the place. Paul, are you around? You might be able to jump in and just comment on that one.
Sorry, Dave, I was just concentrating on something else. Just quickly refresh that question, sorry.
So I'm just touching on that. There was a question in there around PCBU lead contractor and then the subcontractor, and how that relationship might work in with regards to training and competency. And as a lead contractor, you might be well placed to comment on how that might shape.
Yeah, no worries. Ultimately, in most of our other industry groups, we already need to go through and understand and have a measure of confidence in our subcontractors and other suppliers for the competency of their people they're supplying to us. So it shouldn't be anything different in a TTM space. So as we go through and engage with subcontractors, we want to understand what their health and safety systems are, what their workplace support systems are, and all those sorts of things. Well, we want to actually understand their people's competency platforms and things as well. How do they train people? How do they manage competency and ongoing competency as well? So how do they apply their assurance to their work activities? It's not just TTM, it's everything that our suppliers might do for us, from people who might do drilling services or utility services for us, right the way through TTM and transport and all those other things. So it should be no different. Should be just a part of our standard subcontractor engagement processes.
So if I'm hearing you right, there's a piece there around, this isn't something new. We've done this plenty of places in other industries and sectors and domains, so TTM shouldn't necessarily be any different. And secondly, is that it's about a relationship and negotiation between the PCBU, the lead contractor, and the subcontractors. It's not about imposing a particular requirement necessarily all the time. It's about conversing with that subcontractor and gathering evidence as to how they have demonstrated competency and what systems and processes do they have in place. And arguably, having a centralized system that have some commonality to it is going to help that a little bit. So if we're all speaking the same language and we've got similar NZQA credentials behind it, then that does reduce the duplication of effort a bunch for a lot of different organizations. Cool.
Yeah,
thanks
for sure.
for that. Yep. That's awesome, Paul. Much appreciated. There is hopefully, I'm asking if Melissa might be available to dive in and just talk to the concept of recognition of current competency, because as a representative of Connexus, as a provider, providers are at the center of delivery of this model, and they are the ones that will take the lead on how our RCC is undertaken from our current model to the new one. So if you can maybe just talk to how that might shape up, Melissa, and give people some education on the system a bit.
Sure thing. So at the time that we're looking at any sort of new credential, new qualification, or anything like that, that's when we would be looking at existing skills, knowledge, and experience that might be already within the industry. So that could be things like the existing unit standards or warrant system that we've got in place. So providers would use that sort of existing information to identify which parts of a credential that might cross over to the new credential system. And at the time of enrolment, that's when the provider would work with the learners around recognizing those skills, knowledge, and experience, and that would support the completion of the credential. At Connexus, we call that process Advanced Portfolio Assessment, or APA. And it involves gathering of existing evidence or further existing evidence, and that could be things like a completion of a unit standard or an existing warrant that the learner might have, and then they might have a professional discussion with their assessor as well, and there might be any further gap filling to meet the full requirements of that credential by doing an assessment.
Cool. That's awesome. Thank you. So paraphrasing a little bit, if I can apply that even more into the TTM space, giving people maybe a little bit more detail as well, is what we're talking about is an NZQA framework that has existed well outside of TTM in much more extensive scope than our industry. This isn't our system. The NZQA system is entrenched in New Zealand's framework. So we're moving into that system, and that means there's established processes that come with that. We have existing an NZTA warrant system that has some connection to that NZQA system, but not complete. And when we move across from there to there, we need to do some mapping. So we need to map between the two and get a gap analysis and figure out what's missing and what's not. And so when that recognition of current competency process gets undertaken for each individual credential, it'll be a decision at the time for the provider to determine what's there and what's not there. And it's definitely conceivable that the new framework will have aspects that are not in the old one, and there'll need to be some gap filling. But that means that we're making sure that everyone's got good competency, because the new model should represent, a good level of competency. So that's enhancement, and that's making sure that PCBUs have got everything they need to make sure their people are competent. So that individual mapping process from old to new will happen at the time of each individual credential when it comes online. And if you haven't picked up on it yet, that process is going to be modular. So that framework that Biddy shared has got lots of different pieces to it, and each of those individual pieces will come online over the next couple of years. And it's not going to be one hit all at once. They're going to be coming online one at a time. And at each point of that one at a time will be when that RCC mapping process and conversion can happen, and each candidate can be considered whether they meet the requirements of that credential at the time. So my advice to you as an individual would be, keep your records up to date. Gather as much evidence as you can about what work people have been doing and what evidence they have of being competent in the different components of their role, because all of that will count. Not just an old warrant. That old warrant is going to be one piece of the puzzle. What else can you show that demonstrates competency across the spectrum of tasks that you need to do? Cool. Thanks, much appreciated. Right, we've got a couple more minutes. I notice there's one other question that's coming up a little bit, is around trainers and assessors and how that might work. So maybe Betty, you might be able to talk to that just quickly as to what the role of trainers and so at the moment, just highlighting what we have, we've got a system where trainers and assessors are accredited firstly through NZTA. So they undertake a trainer's course and they undertake an assessor's briefing, and they are accredited as a TTM trainer or a TTM assessor through NZTA. They are also then accredited as a Connexus assessor in order to award unit standards alongside the warrants that they award. That model changes going forward because the NZTA component of that disappears. So can you maybe talk to what that looks like in the future, and how those trainers and assessors might relate to the system, and where training and assessment actually will come from?
Yeah, I can, but just not to be conscious not to misspeak on behalf of Connexus. Melissa, are you comfortable stepping in to answer this question? It's more within your area. I put
Betty on the spot, that's why.
Yep, I'm happy to jump in. I was just trying to answer one through chat, so it might be easier just to explain it to everyone. So the process that we will follow, and this is similar to what we have already started to follow with the risk assessment and the traffic management design assessment micro-credentials, is we will be putting out an expression of interest to assessors, asking for people to let us know who are interested in providing that technical learning support for those qualifications, and that will be the process that we follow going forward. Once we've got those expressions of interest, we'll also be looking at what the requirements are for those assessors. So what sort of qualifications or credentials do they need to hold in order to have those qualifications added to their scope? I did post from another comment, if anyone is interested, there was a web link through to the Connexus website for the post that we did for the risk assessment and the temporary traffic management design one. So feel free to go and have a look on the website for that one, and that'll give you a good idea as to sort of the process we're intending to follow going forward.
Betty, anything to add, seeing as you passed that one on? Anything you want to dive into?
Just the importance of workplace assessors. Having that capability will be really, really critical to the success of this framework as a whole. And though you'll still have access to industry assessors and whatnot through Connexus and going in through other providers as well, in order to take the burden off the industry, that level of capability will be really critical. So not just for assessors and training, but also at that verification level. So I urge people to look into what this process looks like. It falls under the existing vocational framework. It's not anything new that we'll be introducing. So the same way that we have assessors in the water and wastewater industry, or in the power and gas industry and whatnot, that same vocational framework will be in place, removing the requirement, obviously, for that hybrid system between Waka Kotahi and Connexus and so on and so forth. So, yeah, just that's something that I think will really support the industry, and it's well worth looking into right now. That system is already available. The ability to register as a workplace assessor through Connexus is something that already exists, and as expressions of interest open up over time, you'll be able to extend your scope and extend your own individual record of learning, and as a assessor gain that capability and grow upon it as the framework goes live for everyone.
And it's important to recognise that Connexus is a very large provider, and it's historically been our construction and infrastructure industry training organisation. So there's a huge lot of history there, and a lot of depth, and a lot of scope around the industry. And their industry training model is obviously very well suited to our sector. However, is also plenty of scope for other PTEs or private training establishments to pick this up and provide it, because it's part of the NZQA framework. So we do definitely have at least 2 PTEs within the TTM sector at least, and that's great. And those other PTEs themselves might pick pieces of it and deliver that. So ideally, this is going to be accessible to as many people as possible. Okay. We're up to 12 o'clock. I just want to close with one other question that I'll try and answer myself very quickly, and it just relates to sort of a bit of confusion around what will be required for you to work on the road or to produce a TMP. Do you have to have the TMP design qualification? So Kim's answered this in written form, but I'll just highlight that. Back to something I said at the start, which is this isn't a mandatory centralized system. There's no entity in the system here that's demanding everyone has XYZ qualification. That's not how it's working. This is returning the responsibility back to PCBUs who own the training and instruction and supervision requirement for their people. This is about providing a centralized system to make that easier for everyone, so that we're all trying to sing from the same sheet. But there isn't an entity demanding that of each other. That being said, you're very likely to see a bunch of PCBUs in the system pick this up and expect it over their contracting chain. For example, Downer, say Betty, and Downer in her capacity as Downer's National Traffic Manager might require that any TMP design done for Downer, they would have to have the NZQA qualification and TMP design. And that's naturally appropriate for that PCBU to expect that across their contracting chain, because that's their way of making sure that the good work product comes out of it and evidence of competency. So whilst there's not a centralized mandated instruction, you can definitely expect it to show up across different contracts, across different contracting chains. Likewise, the NZTA might expect the same, but you can probably expect those kind of conversations to happen down the track, not right now. So that is the end of our webinar, and I want to thank Betty and Wayne very much for your presentation and contribution. Thanks to those in the background answering questions. As I said at the start, this is the beginning of the consultation period, and there is plenty of time and opportunity to answer questions going forward. We encourage that. Please reach out, and if you want more other questions, or you want to hear this again and get a different take, then join us again on the 5th of March. As I mentioned at the start also, 27th of March will be a full Q&A webinar, and that'll be even more complete with questions, and we encourage you to join in on that. There is a specific feedback form that we're asking you to use so that we can catalog the feedback much easier, and that is part of the consultation pack that is landing on the ISG website right now. So on the ISG website, there's a video, there's a copy of the presentation, and there's a feedback form. Thanks very much, team. Ka kite. Appreciate your attendance, and thanks, Betty and Wayne. Cheers.